Once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. As he sat, as he watched and waited while his billy boiled, who'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnie Lukes at the Crossroads. Another interesting day, another interesting forum. I'd like to welcome our two forum members, Betty Lukes from Adelaide. Welcome, Betty.
Oh, good morning, Arnie.
And Wallace Klinck from Canada. Welcome, Wallace.
Yeah, good evening, Arnie. It's nice to be with you once again.
That's it. Good. Yes, this evening thing. Okay, so we've been covering the individual, society, which of course is the three facets of society, is the economic, the political, and the cultural. And of course, devolution, where responsibility for managing your own life and also the community comes back to the individual. You can't avoid that responsibility. And if you do, then of course you create a void, and that void will be filled with people who want to rule you. They want to take charge, and it's by their nature, which unfortunately is a weakness of character. And because Superman is not real. Superman is not real. We're all made up of our own frailties and imperfections. And if you think that handing responsibility over to someone else is going to derive benefit for you, for the community, for now, for today, for a year, for 10 years, it's just not going to happen. We're watching our civilization crumble in front of our eyes, and this is because individuals have handed responsibility and power over to central authorities, and we're tasting it. We're seeing Marxism right through Europe, Australia, America, Canada. It's permeating every part of it. So okay, we're going to open today's forum, and we're going to touch on some history of assessment of communities, and I'm going to hand the floor over to Betty Lukes. Welcome, Betty Lukes.
Arnie, thank you. When you look at the situation today and you hear the leaders of the Western world talk about a threat of World War III, you realize that the powers that they have for destruction could mean a complete annihilation of this civilization. And I think that we've got to ask ourselves, okay, what do we do about this? And history shows that only when the people pressure the leaders do they get what they want, not what the leaders want, what they want. And I can take you back to Magna Carta, and it was the leadership of Stephen Langton, the Archbishop at the time, and the barons who forced King John to look to their grievances and to do things, were concerned with the grievances and wanted them sorted out. And Australians, of course, who are very happy to sit on their backsides, are not taking up the challenge to look for this country, to save this country. And I just want to mention the definition of social credit, because it's important. And social credit, of course, is dealing with the science of communities. You had men who, for 20 years or so, who studied the results of their efforts, their experiments for how to get the community involved in the political arena and work out and to insist on what they wanted. And social credit is the power of human beings in association to produce the results intended, measured in terms of their satisfaction, not the United Nations satisfaction, not the world leaders' satisfaction, but the people's satisfaction. And I am reminded when I read the headlines about the chance of a World War III, I am reminded of the fact that you look at the three that are attacking Syria at the moment, you've got the French president, a banker, a figures man, a money man. You've got Theresa May, the daughter of a Christian minister for what it's worth, but really a career politician. And then you've got Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump is a figures man again. He's a businessman. And what they have in the way of wisdom would be very little. And I think that we have to look at this. Australia has soaring debts, but not just Australia, as Wally pointed out the other day, that the debt of the world is 3 times the ability of the, I guess you'd say, the gross national product measured in terms of financial terms, 3 times the amount. And of course, over here in Australia, we really are a sitting duck as far as that goes. The soaring debt, the personal and the state debt, and the federal debt. And another thing I just want to mention before I hand over to Arnie is Jeffrey Dobbs spoke about how the different parties divide truth. And I thought what a good example there was in Andrew Bolt's column today. He's referring to the Greens fellow, who's talking about a basic income taken out of the people's taxes, I might add. But he lines up no work, free money, and legal dope. That's what this Greens fellow is promoting. Well, doesn't Andrew take into account the robotic revolution? If you look further in I think it's in the Australian today, it's talking about the robotic revolution. People can't find work. And when it comes to free money, well, of course, that's the basic income being paid out of the people's taxes. The less and less people who are working will have to be paying more and more taxes. That's not the answer.
Okay, thank you, Betty. That's you've had a pretty good run, and you've covered a lot of areas, and I don't know that we're going to respond to so many different subjects in one hit. So we've got to try and come back to our target and explain it, and if you like, disseminate what we're doing. Wally Klinck.
Well, Betty, you've covered an enormous span of the topics there. I think we have to think in very basic terms. The organism only functions as an organism optimally according to the health of the individual cells within that organization and all of its members. If the organism is ill, it does not function properly. So that I think that it is really a delusion to imagine that you can hand over responsibilities to some power external to yourself, thinking that they will automatically solve our problems. We are all personally responsible for what goes on in the world. We're all personally responsible for having input into the policies that are being enacted. And so I think that really it's a cultural thing. I think we've seen the degradation of our culture. I think part of it is disillusionment because of the failure of our society to provide the results that we really subconsciously at least think that we should be able to have and enjoy. And there has been at the same time a conscious and deliberate assault on our values, and the failure of our system to deliver, and the assault upon our culture have worked very, very badly to destroy things. And it's something that we as social predators have to, I think our function is to try and help regenerate the culture, to provide an element of realism which can give hope to the average citizen, a hope that will give him faith in his ability to change things and to achieve what we should be able to achieve as a society and association. Betty has talked also about economic aspects and the debt. Well, the debt, I don't know how to make the point, but it is a rather glaring reality. When you see anything that has been produced, it has already been paid for physically. All the inputs that have been required, the physical inputs, which are the real cost of producing anything, have been met. Otherwise, that object or that item could not exist. That's axiomatic. It's a self-evident truth. And yet, how is it that we can have enormous obligations on our future in respect of things that we have already produced and have acquired from a financial standpoint? This doesn't make sense. I mean, it may be that we've been so accustomed to debt that we are not inclined to really think about it in a fundamental, but we've got to get back to fundamentals and really think about basic things and start from the ground up. As Gorham Munson said in his book, he said, when it comes to money, he said, just forget about everything you have learned, forget about what you think, go back to fundamentals and start building up from the bottom so that you follow it through in a methodical way and don't get distracted by all sorts of false ideas. And I think that that's very important. Now, the thing of it is that debt, you have to look at that debt as actually part of our inheritance. But debt is not an inheritance. If you inherit debt, that's not a good thing. What that debt actually reflects is our inheritance in the things that we have been able to produce, although it hasn't been done in a proper manner because of the way the system being so dysfunctional, and that we should have been able to enjoy society collectively without any debt, without any financial debt. We've produced it. Then why were we not able to enjoy it without going into debt? Because the system is dysfunctional. And I think a lot of people regard social credit as, well, it's that theory that existed years ago, and it's another curiosity, but it's not a curiosity. It's something that is dealing with fundamental principles and fundamental reality. It's not just some kind of an idea that came along, just a fad. It's something that's dealing with reality. And I mean, orthodox economics, Keynesian economics, is dealing with reality too. But it's distorting reality, and it's distorting it in such a way as to centralize wealth and power. A normal system, look, the purpose of production is consumption. If you're producing things, it should flow to those for whom it is produced. And it should flow automatically, dynamically. It shouldn't be distributed on the basis of you contracting an obligation for the future when it's already paid for. Now, if you can show that production is created, is all due to human effort, then you can make a point for saying that everything that people get must be paid for by their effort. But if you've got machines and the forces of nature that are providing these things, you can't make that argument. It doesn't hold water. And if those things are available, why on earth should people not be able to access them and enjoy them without being put on a treadmill of debt that is driving us to distraction, tension, the tensions that cause marital problems, that cause problems between different jurisdictions and nations? And you mentioned the problem of war. How can it be that rational, mature leaders of major nations in the world can even be talking about war? What's going on? There's something that is obviously totally dysfunctional. It's not a normal situation. And it is very much to do with the fact that the financial system does not reflect what is actually going on in a normal economy, where energy is being applied to materials to convert those materials into forms that are useful for human beings.
Thank you, Wally. That's most important. The financial system has been weaponized. It has been weaponized. It is used for ulterior motives. It is used to centralize power. It is used to put absolute power in the hands of, if you like, a financial cabal, where they dominate world politics, they dominate policy, and it filters all the way down through the United Nations, through the nations themselves, where the leaders of the nations go cap in hand to actually get the necessary, if you like, the funds. And what are the funds? If you follow the reports on their website, and it shows you, they create money out of nothing. So we could just as easily do it in a scientific manner, where the financial system was balanced to the economic system, and it is so wrong. They've weaponized money, and of course they're getting to the point now where the policy, of course, is to argue with nations, to spuriously, I said it the other day, spuriously make up these accusations against Russia. Russia's no model nation, but the fact is, these are false flags to justify things. You think that America is a good nation, doesn't have chemical weapons? I'll remind everyone, 1945, the American nation obliterated 2 cities in Japan unnecessarily obliterated 2 cities of civilians, and the Allies obliterated cities like Dresden through Europe. They just burnt the whole city to the ground with hundreds of thousands of people, incinerated them, and this humbug that comes from the leaders. Betty Lukes.
Well, yes, I want to talk about the importance of the individual in this, Arnie, but before I do, I just want to point out my granddaughter was kind enough to buy me the film on Winston Churchill, which we watched last night. And I thought, oh, that was all very well, but it's what they didn't mention in the film that to me was important. And for instance, as an example, it was the Bank of England that financed Hitler's war effort, helped build up Hitler. And of course, now Hitler is he's the demon in all of this, but what about the Bank of England as an example? And but I won't go any further into that, but just all I can say is that you people, who are watching this, you really do have to do your homework and be serious about it, because you're the next generation who are going to have to live with all of this. Now, in the early days of social credit, what they did was to conduct experiments as to what worked and what was the best way to do it. And Eric Butler learned from that. And Eric Butler here in Australia, what they did was to set up what are called Voters Policy Associations, VPAs. And it was based on one principle, and that is that you didn't have too many members in the one group, because what happens is that there are maybe 2 or 3 activists, and the rest just sit there and feed off of what is happening. So if they got members and they started to go towards, say, 14 members of folk working together, individuals working together, then they would divide that into 2. They found that the optimum number was about 7 members who were the most effective in writing letters to the newspapers, challenging their politician, suggesting things to their politician, educating the public, educating themselves, because no one's going to make you do these things, and no one has made those who are social creditors, no one has made them learn social credit. They have wanted to find an answer for the terrible situation that the world is in, and they've looked for those policies that worked if you go back in history. And as I say, they would divide the large numbers into 2 so that they were more effective. And if I think about it, I see that that's how the Russian people did it under the Soviet system. If Solzhenitsyn wrote an article or something that they wanted to spread around, it was the individual who would copy it, sometimes page by page, retype it and circulate it amongst the underground. And if we look at the numbers again, once you get to a statewide level, of course, Jeffrey Dobbs has pointed out that people are becoming just numbers rather than people, and it's too much. And you see that all the time with political parties. And then, of course, people need to practice their democracy. Don't talk about democracy if you also don't talk about responsibility. And you won't have your freedom if you don't exercise, if you don't strengthen your resolve to help save this country. And as for when it gets to the federal level, and we're thinking of political parties now, then the odds are stacked against us, because unless the idea or the policy that you want to get through has permeated the nation from the bottom up, once you get to the federal level, you're into the numbers game. And the numbers have no qualities, to withstand mass manipulation, and the money power and the mainstream media just overwhelm what you're doing. So it does come back to the individual educating and informing and doing their best amongst their own communities. It has to begin back there. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you for that. I'm just going to show our viewers the website alor.org library, and down the bottom right hand side, you go down there, you'll find that there's the Voters Policy Association Handbook, and so that's worth a read, and to have a look at what you, at least if you're active, you're of a mind to become active and to become effective in your community, then that's a starting point. The VPA handbook, and also of course the social dynamics lectures, which are on the front page ALOR. Now I'm reminded, I spoke about it with others yesterday, today, about GetUp, this organisation GetUp, and how they actually harnessed the social credit in the community. They harnessed it. Now they're a left-wing organisation, and they knowingly harnessed it in order to undo a supposedly conservative candidate, actually a politician, a conservative politician, to undo her. And between the two major parties, of course, they worked in cahoots to share preferences against an independent, to get the independent in. Now, the independent wasn't independent at all. The independent was actually a product of the left-wing GetUp mechanism. So they used social credit. They went into the community, they assessed what was going on, they took the grievances out of the community, they generated ferment within that community in order to mobilise them and direct towards supposedly an outlet that wasn't of either of the two major parties, and the result was, of course, that the Conservative was defeated, and both the major parties were involved in that. So it was interesting. It was all three groups to get this Conservative MP out. And so that to me is a very good example. If you go to your ABC and search about Cathy McGowan, the seat of Indy in the 2013 election. All right, Wally Klinck.
Well, of course, Arnie, when you talk about social credit, I guess people don't realize it, but every time you do anything in this world successfully, you are utilizing the social credit. You're realizing it. Because the credit means to believe that you can achieve something. It comes from the word credo. And so that whenever you do something successfully, you really are exercising social credit. The problem is to identify the appropriate policy in order to direct your efforts in a way that are going to be fruitful and constructive. That's where the challenge comes in. And you must remember, too, that money is an instrument of power and of policy. And if the financial system is centralized, that means that the philosophy that drives that particular organization or institution must have a policy. And that policy will be directed to achieve certain concrete results within society. So it's been said that, and a lot of that, we have to realize that a lot of the ability to achieve a policy, it depends upon support you can get from people who will lend themselves to your policy or the achievement of it. And that is a mind game. It is a mind game. It's a big psychological exercise. And so the instruments which shape public opinion are the determining force in that particular game, or you can call it war perhaps. In other words, finance is concentric with, or I should say that the media, which is the opinion-making body in society, is concentric with and subservient to the financial power. Because it's the media that shapes public opinion, which makes it possible for the financial system as a centralized system to impose its policies upon society. And we have to remember that, so that the media has got to be regarded as an instrument of the financial system. And I think that we have to recognize that the basic policy of the financial system is not beneficial to the community. And the established media is complicit in that.
Thank you, Ollie. That's very important. We've got to put things in perspective, that if we're going to be effective in the community with the VPA handbook and the principle of working in association with others, the first thing you've got to do is consider education, and you've got to educate yourself. It won't come, your thinking straight off the cuff is really only a moment's sort of thought, whereas what we've got here within the library, within the movement, is honestly, it's harvesting hundreds, if not thousands of years of deep thinking. How do civilizations occur? How do they maintain, sustain themselves? These are deep thinking subjects, and they don't come lightly. You can't just turn off your smart device and then all of a sudden you're going to have some profound bit of insight that hasn't been thought of before. These things go back to fundamentals, and so you've got to really place yourself into a position of discipleship to work your way through the maze, which is this thinking that's necessary. Betty Lukes.
Arnie, I'd like to just mention a little bit of personal history. I was married to a Latvian. My husband was Latvian, and he used to talk of communism. And I can remember saying to him, "Oh, John, why do you go on about that? That's happened, years ago, and that was in Europe. It's not here in Australia." And of course, I wouldn't always agree with what he had to say. But one day I read two books by a Romanian pastor. I think he was Romanian. And one was called Tortured for Christ, and the other was called In God's Underground. And of course, what it was, he was imprisoned under Stalin because he publicly criticized what Stalin was doing. And when I read those books, I couldn't imagine that human beings could be so inhumane to their fellow man. Because after all, although I'd grown up during the Second World War, didn't personally experience it, and so had no concept of enemies against this country. Anyhow, one day the question was formed in my mind, well, if this is communism, what's the Christian answer? Because we lived in a Christian-influenced country. And that started me on the road all those years ago to look at all of these questions. And of course, it led me to social credit. and it's in social credit that I found the answers, and I can only encourage people to do the same.
Thank you,
Thank
Betty.
you, Arnie.
No worries. Thank you for that. And I'll highlight to readers again, our listeners, that there's a significant library here on our ALOR website that covers most of Douglas's major presentations and speeches, and also other social creditors, and of course also here on the left here, Eric Dudley Butler, the Australian activist who worked tirelessly for 50 years forming the Australian League of Rights, and the pedigree of these people is commendable. I can't highlight it enough. Wally Klinck.
Well, yes, certainly the stressing of education, Arnie, is more than appropriate. If we just more or less go about our business and think from day to day without educating ourselves, what we're doing is we're probably just thinking in terms of the suggestions that are made to us through the media day after day and month after month and year after year. We're just regurgitating it within our mind. And if we speak, we're just regurgitating it verbally. We are not thinking. We're just repeating. We have a cultural heritage that goes way, way back, thousands of years ago. That is what our civilization is built on. It's the foundation. And if we don't have some understanding of the nature of the foundation, we will not be able to maintain the foundation, and we will not be able to build upon it. Now, there has been great failure to produce the results that we would expect from a Christian civilization. There are different factors involved here. That is partly human frailty and human failures, but it is also because that culture has been under great influence from an external source, and it has impinged upon our culture. It has insinuated itself into our culture, and it has impaired the ability of our culture to express itself in an organic sort of way, so that we have not really produced a Christian civilization in theory and in words and in concept, but not really in an organic way. And you have to remember that human beings, being human beings, do respond to what they see, what they can smell, what they can feel, what they can experience directly. And if they don't experience things that are favorable, it's going to really have an eroding effect upon their confidence in their civilization. And I think that you have to recognize that the Marxist approach is to assault that civilization and to pull the skids out from underneath of it. In other words, to destroy the confidence that the people have in their civilization. Now, we have to recognize the real strengths that we have and what we have produced. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Try to improve the situation by building upon what you have, and go back to study your civilization in order to understand it. Because if you don't understand it and just react to daily events, you will never really understand what it's all about.
Thank you, Wally. Thank you very much for that. That's exactly right. There's no shortcut. There's no quick answer to where we find ourselves. We're at a crossroads. That's why this website is here. That's why this forum is here. We are at a crossroads. Which way are we going to go? If we sit on our hands, we're going to move into revolution. That's it. We're looking at it in Europe. It's imminent in Europe. America is doing some basically insane things in the Middle East. We're teasing, we're poking the giant Russia, and Russia isn't alone. Russia is there with Iran and China. Don't think they're alone. And the thing is that they all have sufficient energy within themselves. I'm talking nuclear bombs and things like that to destroy the planet. Now, we don't have the luxury of doing nothing. We've sat on our hands really for probably 70 years. We've sat on our hands. We've just inherited. We have been the prodigal son. We've just gone and spent our inheritance. And now look at us. We're about to eat worse than the swine. We need to go back to our Father. We need to go back to our spiritual Father, our spiritual roots, and we need to restore what we've lost, what we've misplaced, what we have forgotten. And that's no short call. That's no short answer. That's we've got to get to work. Betty Lukes.
Well, Annie, I think you've said it all really, and that's the truth of the matter. How many people who are listening to this really understand their culture? How many understand the battles that were fought psychologically and politically for the freedoms that we have today? And I think that's where we should go. Thank you, Arnie.
No worries. Thank you, Betty. Okay, well, on that, I'm going to do one last lap on today's forum. Wally Klinck.
Well, you know, Arnie, I think we have to think about what we are as human beings. The communists regard us as nothing more than matter and motion. And so their policy is based on essentially force. We are nothing more than matter to be manipulated. There is no higher conception there. The Christian idea involves the Holy Spirit, but the Holy Spirit is a word, or they're words that we use to try and express something that we believe in and we feel, but we don't really understand. We can't describe it in any kind of word picture or graphically, but it's something. Do you believe that we are beings that respond within creation to something greater that runs through the threads of creation? Is there some kind of a higher consciousness or a purpose, which we call love, the law of love, rather than the law of man? Or are we just simply organic material to be organized? I don't quite understand. The communist position stands for what they call freedom from exploitation and all this sort of thing, which would imply some kind of a moral basis. But their tactics and their conception of man denies that. And their policies have been demonstrated in the past to have been absolutely disastrous and caused untold suffering that none of us really can know because we weren't part directly of it. And so we have to, I think, decide whether or not we actually are part of a creation where there is some kind of an overriding, pervasive consciousness or love or motivating force to which we respond and relate, or whether we're just like nothing. It's a very fundamental thing because it will determine the type of policy that you determine that you develop in society, and it will determine the attitude you have to your fellow man. Is your fellow man an independent being with a personal relationship to that power, or is your fellow man just something to be sacrificed to some giant state law or power or force without a principle, without love, without really being motivated by a higher and more noble and divine purpose?
Thank you, Wally.
Thank you, Wally.
That's beautiful. The where we are now, we're just before Anzac Day. Anzac Day is mid next week, and I'm reminded of the personal sacrifice thousands upon thousands of my fellow countrymen made in order for a higher ideal. They didn't go there for the glory. They went there from a position of service. They were dealing with their fears, and they were putting on the line everything that they had, which of course is their life, and they so many thousands of them paid with that, and it was not for nothing. We've got to stop and think about it. What was it about? It was more than that, And also in this month coming, we've got to think about, well, there's a particular season. It's called Pentecost. Now, there's a bloke called Peter, was a disciple of Jesus, and he faltered. He failed. He failed 3 times. Jesus knew he was going to do it. And when Jesus rose from the dead and Peter saw him at a distance, Peter ran in front of everyone to get to him first. He said, Peter, feed my sheep. Peter, feed my sheep. Jesus forgave him. Now, when Pentecost came, Peter was empowered. He was empowered. He had a power above himself. It was more than the carnal. He's not matter in motion. He is a spirit being. And Peter, in the end, Peter was martyred for his faith. He held his ground and he went to the very end. And that's where we are. We are as a people. We're at that crossroads. Pentecost is very important. We need to tap into that power. And that power, of course, is God. It's that personal relationship that you can have with your Maker. And pursuing what he wants you to do, not what you want to do. It's not easy. You stand tall, your shoulders back, and you face the challenge, you take up your cross. That's what this is about. We're at the crossroads. And I challenge you as I challenged myself. I can't avoid it, neither can you. Arnie Lux. Once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree, as he sat as he watched and waited while his billy boiled, who called a waltzing Matilda